Feeling lost about your career path? Not sure what you want to do after uni? You're in good company with Dr. Denise Dillon, who has real advice for navigating university when you're not sure where you're headed. Professionally Psyched is the podcast that brings you cutting-edge psychology research and real-world insights from our psych community of clinicians, researchers, and educators alike. We're here to explore how psychology shapes our everyday lives and impacts the world around us. Hi everyone, and welcome to Professionally Psyched. I'm Dr. Alison Sheaves, lecturer in the psychology department at James Cook University. And before we get started, we would like to acknowledge the custodians of the land in which we record. And for me today, that's the Bindal and Woolgoorookabar peoples. I pay my respect to elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and cultures from wherever you may be tuning in from across the country. We are very excited to be back starting a brand new season of Professionally Psyched. Today, we join our host Kira Young as she chats with Dr. Denise Dillon, Acting Dean of Research at James Cook University in Singapore, as she shares game-changing insights about embracing challenges, dealing with imposter syndrome, and why psychology careers go way beyond clinical work. So grab your headphones and get ready to get professionally psyched about why psychology is more diverse than you think. Enjoy.
Hello, my name is Kira and I am a current honours psychology student here at James Cook University. Today, I have the privilege of sitting down and talking to Dr. Denise Dillon, who is the current Acting Dean of Research at James Cook University in Singapore. Thanks for joining me today, Denise.
Hi, Kira. Nice to join you.
Absolutely. To start with, would it be okay if you told me a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so very broadly, I have been in Singapore now at James Cook University for 17 years. And I did my undergraduate and postgraduate study at James Cook University at the Cairns campus. So I'm very familiar. I feel like I'm a JCU person through and through on both sides of the equation.
That's exciting. I love JCU, and I'm sure you can say the same considering you have continued your studies there yourself. Could you tell me a little bit more about yourself in terms of your specific journey from being a psychology student to now what your current role is?
So when I was an undergraduate, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I think that's not completely uncommon. A lot of our students here seem to know very much what they're doing. But I took a lot of English literature classes while I was doing psychology. And I initially had wanted to sign up for law. So it was just a journey of finding things that interested me and would continue to interest me moving forward. So I completed essentially 2 degrees, one in English literature and one in psychology. And everybody guided me to say you should stick with psychology because it's more easy to find a career, which it has turned out to be true. But I've kept up my interest in English literature as well. So I have published in that field also. So for my honours year in psychology, I did a psycholinguistics topic on metaphor. And that was the first time in 4th year I realised that research was a thing you could do as a career. It didn't just have to be stopping there. You could keep doing that. And so I started to explore options for postgraduate study. Fortunately, I was eligible and applied for PhD and applied for a scholarship. I didn't get a scholarship in the first round, so I went out and did some work experience in Cairns, working with children who had been separated from families and with the idea of reuniting, which was interesting work, but I knew that that wasn't for me, and it consolidated even further the idea that I really wanted to get into research if I could. Fortunately, in the second round of scholarship offers, I did get a college level scholarship. And so I quit that job immediately and jumped into doing PhD at JCU. And my PhD topic was a sociolinguistic topic studying the meaning of values in wet tropics World Heritage Area. So the meaning of that very convoluted term amongst different groups and the way it's used in a specific context. And so that took me through all of my PhD years. It was a fascinating journey. Lots of steep learning curves along the way because I had to learn new methodologies. I had to discover which methodologies were suited to exploring that topic. And so there was a lot of doubt, a lot of imposter syndrome, but it's something that I think you just move through. And I've come to know from myself through my studies that I do like challenges. And so if there's a challenge there, I will accept it.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. I feel like that's a really good point with imposter syndrome. I know that even completing my fourth year at the moment, it can sometimes pop up. And even some of my lecturers have mentioned it's a very universal experience for psychology students. Can you maybe give me a little bit more insight in how you push through that, I guess?
Just incidentally, I think it's common amongst all of them because here at Singapore, I'm also the Associate Dean Research Education and I look after all of our HDR students here. It's a common amongst all of them, no matter what discipline. So for myself, I just acknowledged that it was a thing. And I came across a wonderful book while I think during undergrad years. It's called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And it just gives that set of ideas about just because something's fearful, it doesn't mean you should avoid it. There are great reasons why we should pursue them and look into those fears and explore why we might be fearful of them. So that book was a little bit of an inspiration to understand that just because I felt that way didn't mean that was the reality of it. And what really, this might sound weird, but what really got me through was the motivation. I really wanted to wear the floppy hat. I wanted that PhD bonnet. And the only way I could get to do that authentically was to go through with integrity and do all the hard yards and just get done what needed to be done. So it did get me through.
I love that. That's really good insight and nice to hear from someone that's been there and done that and also come out the other side. You mentioned that you've done a lot of research yourself, and had a quite interesting journey there in terms of the different ways your research has taken you. Specifically, I recall that you said you've had to learn a lot of different methodologies along the way, and that can be challenging considering there's lots of changes and shifts between projects. For first year students that might be starting off on their first research project themselves, is there any advice you could give?
I think just accept that coming into psychology isn't necessarily going to have you face to face working with people as clients. A lot of our psychology work involves investigating data to help populations more broadly. A lot of people may, end up working with clients, but many are not. Even when I worked with the Department of Child and Families, I was working with the information in the back end more so than face to face with the people who were involved. So I was doing family trees, tracking families and realizing that somebody might have had more children than we had realized and we could reunite even further. And so data comes in many different forms, and the way we treat that data depends on the questions we're asking. And so that's where the different methodological decisions come from. It's what is your question? What's the type of data? What are you trying to test or answer? And then what method is appropriate to do that? So I think it's a bit of an investigative journey, and I think it speaks to the wonderful wealth of exploratory and creativity that people have to work with data. It doesn't just have to be the typical people think of psychology as rats and stats. And I don't see that at all. I think it's really fascinating, and particularly now moving into the world of artificial intelligence and the data that's there. Of course, there's always the problems of artificial data being generated and published as authentic. So there are wonderful challenges ahead, I think, for students now to really get abreast of that and understand the different ways that data will be generated and used and interpreted for the good, hopefully, of
society. Yeah, that's really interesting and particularly impacts to watch what AI is going to do. That's definitely going to be an evolving space to watch, and I'm equally as interested to watch that evolve. Looking back at your psychology degree, are there any skills that you evolved and currently have taken into your current role?
That's a really interesting one. One of the, I guess, conceptual challenges we had in our fourth year, there was a lecture series that we had to attend each week called the Jocelyn Whale Seminar. And researchers would come in and present their research. And some of them were very, internationally renowned researchers, and they were delivering complex information. And one of the assignments that we had for that year was to do a reflective journal of our attendance at those seminars. It seems funny to me at the time now, because we didn't know what a reflective journal was. We didn't know what it was to reflect. We'd never been asked to do that. But it took a long time to understand what the lecturer was asking of us in that reflection. But I think it's a really valuable skill to understand. It's that your phenomenological experience of being in those situations and listening, and what you're taking away from it relative to the things that you knew coming in, what you might aspire to. And so I think that's a valuable skill, to reflect on one's own learning and what you want to get out of your learning moving forward as well.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I've probably taken my first steps towards the reflective process myself this year in fourth year. My unit coordinator calls it the year of reflection at JCU.
Oh,
So I've
fantastic.
definitely experienced myself. In terms of that process of reflectivity in practice, have you got any advice that potentially students who are stepping into the space for the first time can take on board when taking those first steps of learning how to be reflective?
Yeah, I think it's being open to oneself, and it doesn't have to go into the necessarily sensitive areas. It's just understanding, what type of learner am I? So, for instance, when I was in those sessions, I used to draw doodles. And I said to the lecturer, sometimes my notes are just doodles. I'm not really getting this. And she said, well, just send them to me. And so that was part of my journal in the end. And I did have notes, here and there, part of it. And I think that's just understanding the way that each individual can engage, understanding that sometimes it is exhausting to listen because it's cognitively demanding. You're using resources. I know the sensation when I first went to university. I was 35. I'd never stepped foot in a university classroom before then. So I was a mature age student. And I thought it was going to be really easy because I'd done farm work, physical hard labor outdoors. So I thought sitting in a lecture theatre was going to be super easy, listening to, very interesting things. And it dawned on me that as soon as I went into lecture theatres, I would get sleepy because my mind was not used to that type of labour, the cognitive labour of listening and paying attention to people and taking notes. And so I think the reflective process can be helpful there too, in understanding, when the demands are high, and when one can take time to take a break.
That's really interesting insight. You mentioned that you had a bit of a shift there and went back to uni as a mature age student. Is it okay if I get a bit of insight into what triggered you going back to uni?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a generational thing in part. So as I was growing up, there was never an indication that girls in our family would be educated at that level. And that was a generational understanding. I heard it from many people. And particularly in a small town, I think as well, the fact of that is everybody had those gendered expectations for what roles you'd end up doing. And so a bit of my rebellion was to do none of those things. And so I think the common gender expectation roles, you could be a teacher or a nurse or a secretary. And so I stayed away from all of those types of roles. I worked in a tea packing factory for a long time. I did nursery work, planting plants at an orchid nursery, and I worked out on a fruit farm. And also, while I was at the fruit farm, I worked for the guy who owned the fruit farm, was also a veterinarian. Anthony Kaler. So I worked for him part-time each way. And so I think when I got to doing the vet work, although most of my work was really just cleaning after surgery and holding the animal's paws while the surgery was happening, it got me thinking that I could do more than just farm work all my life. And so started to explore how I could do more, which led me to going to James Cook University in Cairns and seeing what was possible to enroll there. But it did take me all that time to realize that there was something more that I could do.
That's really amazing and interesting to hear how you've gone and lived such a different life and now you've come to the other end where you're working as an academic.
Yeah.
I'm curious, in your day-to-day role as the acting Dean of Research for JCU, what does that look like for you?
That's a really interesting one. And that's been another steep learning curve because it wasn't a role that I put my hand up for. We had our Dean of Research left, and I was the Associate Dean Research Education here. And so I had already a lot of knowledge about what goes on here in research. And before that, I'd also been our first Associate Dean Research because it was the first time we'd set that up as well. So I had several years already of experience in those roles and working closely with the Dean of Research. So when the Dean left, it was just left a position opening until we had a permanent recruitment for the next one. And so she recommended me to be the acting Dean. We had always anticipated it would be about 6 months, and it's now been more than 2 years. And it's been a fascinating and wonderful 2 years. I've appreciated it so much because it's helped me get my head around more of the strategic basis of what needs to be done in research, how to find ways to balance the governance and compliance and supporting and encouraging research to happen. So we have lots of scope for getting new initiatives to support research, which is fascinating, and getting researchers more involved in collaborations, formal collaborations, not just here within the team, but also with industry partners so that we can actually get out into the community and create impact. So it's been, a fascinating role. What it looks like in reality, a lot of it is administrative. I have to go in and approve expenditures in different systems. I have to go into Gecko and read applications, and I also read ethics applications. But part of the fascination of that is that I do get to read the applications and understand what researchers are doing, which can let me know how then to support them and foster greater collaborations and get people together even more.
That does sound incredibly fascinating, considering you're almost at the forefront of research before it's actually out there and published. That is amazing. You obviously are very passionate about research. What has kept you passionate about this field, considering that sometimes, like you mentioned, it can become challenging when completing a project?
Oh, it's always challenging. And my own field, I hadn't mentioned, but is environmental psychology. And so the research there is like, when you think about psychology, you don't always think of environments. It's mostly about people. And environmental psychology brings the environments back to the fore to say, well, people change environments, but environments can change people as well. The way we feel, the way we behave, the way we think. And so it's important to have the whole and full understanding, and that environments can be built or they can be natural environments. And I think what's really kept me fascinated about this now is being in Singapore, because it's a very highly urbanized place here. We have, something like 7 million people in a very small geographic area. And that's completely contrasted to where I came from in North Queensland. Innisfail and even Cairns is a very small city. And my first year here, there were many times when I just wanted to run back home because there's too many people. But what's great about Singapore is it positions itself as a city in nature, which is very true. They have lots of connectivity for the very small area of proper nature that we have, national parks, but connectivity around several hundred parks in Singapore. It's astonishing the number of parks that we have, and they're all connected through a network of walking trails and biking trails. So it's very easy to get around into nature from anywhere you are in Singapore. So my interest in that is seeing, does that foster nature connectedness more strongly here, or are there other factors involved? And so there's still lots to be done in that area. Nature connectedness is something that's being more and more recognized around the world, and the importance of having proximity to nature so that people can get those nature experiences easily and regularly, not just a one-off thing. So yeah, I think the part of it that keeps me interested there is that there are so many more questions to be asked and answered in that space.
That does sound incredibly interesting, and that's really insightful to show that psychology is not just what people typically think it is. It can go in completely different avenues, and it's really interesting to hear the different types of studies that we can do. You mentioned that there are lots and lots more questions to be asked within your field. I'm interested to pick your brain. What do you think might be the next big research project within that space?
Yeah. Oh gosh, there could be several. One of the ones that I think keeps coming back to me is, and this is in some ways probably speaks to my PhD research on the meaning of words. So I'm more and more interested in now the meaning of nature, because in my field, people are comparing real life nature experiences with virtual nature experiences, or with just images, or with videos. So for me, it's a fascinating conceptual space of what is nature and what will nature become for people as cities become more urbanized, and it's much more difficult to incorporate actual nature that is organic and, you know, that comes from the earth rather than what people create as nature.
That will be really interesting to watch, and that touches back on our point from before of how technology and the evolution of the world's really impacting and shaping how research is moving forward in the field. Well, Denise, thank you so much for your time and insights this morning. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Oh, it's been great talking to you too, Kira. Thanks for giving up your time.
No worries.
Stepping up to doing the podcast.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Professionally Psyched. This podcast would not be possible without the ongoing support of our Psych community. If you would like to show your support, or if you want us to cover anything on the podcast, reach out via our emails, and don't forget, you can listen to full episodes on Spotify